everything mental health. And do you mind? Now, the name actually, I have to give credit to my guest today, Irfan. Irfan came up with this name when we were trying to think, what could we call it? So Jazakallahu khairan, and I think it's very poignant in terms of what we're going to cover. Now, a little bit about you, Irfan. You obviously are a fellow presenter. I know you've been doing the Drive Time show for quite some time, very popular, mashallah. And also you are public engagement lead at Loros Hospice, particularly focusing on end-of-life care in ethnic minority communities and improving end-of-life care, which is pretty impressive and actually extremely challenging and difficult as well, because we're talking about end-of-life there. So alhamdulillah, you also have been volunteering for a very long time for Rehana Mercy as well. And you do lots of volunteering, I know, mashallah. So jazakallah so much for coming on today. Anything more you want to say before I ask you some questions?
First of all, assalamu alaikum, Sister Rehana, and thank you so much for inviting me to be a guest on the first Mental Health Do You Mind program for Ramadan FM. Assalamu alaikum to all the listeners. You make me sound so important in the introduction, so I'm really grateful. I just think, as someone from Leicester, someone who is from the community here, I just want, as I get older, I think you become more aware of the importance of trying to make a contribution. We can't just become passengers as we go through life. We have to do something, for ourselves, for our akhirah, but also to show our children, our youngsters, that they have an important role to play in helping the community to develop, to flourish, and to go forward.
Subhanallah. I mean, such words of wisdom, and that's coming from a parent. So, Irfan, mashallah. And I think you're absolutely right. We can either just be travelers wandering along. The term that comes to my mind is badakte. I can't really translate it. I don't know if whether you can. You're just stumbling along,
You're just plodding along.
Yeah. So to have purpose and to have meaning in life and to make a difference not only to your world and the akhirah, impacting on other people's lives and making a difference to others. So I know that you didn't like that big introduction, but it's really important, because what I want to say to people before I start is each and every one of you can make a difference. It doesn't even have to be that you are formally volunteering in a big organization. Anything that you can do, even a smile, is charity. That makes a huge difference to somebody who might be not feeling so great. Keeping an eye on your neighbours, any form of volunteering, these are all the sunnah. We get reward for it. It's a win-win situation, and it's actually one of the 5 ways of well-being, maintaining your mental well-being, volunteering. So doing charitable acts, whatever it is, and the world doesn't have to know about it, but you're doing it and Allah knows, and may Allah reward you. So continue doing them, and maybe do them with intention and consciously. I know of course we do lots of things without thinking about it, and that is great, because we don't want that, but to encourage is really good. So well done, mashallah.
I just think, just to build on that point, if you can find something that you enjoy, something that you're passionate about, it doesn't feel like volunteering.
Oh my goodness,
Because sometimes the term volunteering, I've got to give up my time, I've got to do this. And you may or may not enjoy what it is you're doing. But I think if you can tune into your environment, be aware of what's going on around you, and think, actually, you know what, I've got some skills in this area, I would like to give back and I would like to support. And that's, for me, how it started with Rehana Mercy. I had experience in PR, communications and marketing, and mashallah, the group at Rehana Mercy are just incredible. The people there, I can never even dream to come to their level. But whatever things I could do, I could bring in things like writing their annual report or helping them with some marketing communications. That's where it started from me, and then it just grows from there. And then you meet more people, and they inspire you, they encourage you, and it just snowballs from there.
And this is it, isn't it? And then pretty much like you, the same thing, the skills I had. And you know what, Irfan? A lot of the times when I did things, I didn't have the skills, but I had the passion and the drive.
Yes.
And my motive would always be about making a difference. And the thing that I would do is, if I didn't have the skills, I'd go and get them. And that's what I continue to do. I've just recently done the same. I'm working for a mental health organization. I didn't have all the knowledge I wanted to do the best I could for the community. So I went back to university. So these things are really important. You don't have to study. I'm not asking you to go to university, dear listeners. I'm just saying, utilize opportunities and make a difference. Okay, so today, Irfhan, we are actually talking about mental health stigma. You and I had got into quite a big conversation around this, didn't we?
We did.
Yes. And the impact on our communities. And because we're on Ramadan FM, and I know a lot of our listeners are from our community, we know the challenges that we face and the difficulties we have around difficult subjects, taboo subjects, and mental health being one of those. And although in many ways we have come a long way, we have a long way to go. So bearing that in mind, I want to focus today on mental health stigma, the shame and the secrecy within our Muslim community. And what is all that about? What's going on there? So it's very poignant for me because I actually set up my organisation, Jamila's Legacy, which is a mental health organisation to address mental health stigma. And Jamila, it's in memory of Jamila, so I hope you will all remember her in your prayers, was somebody who did really struggle with her mental health problems. She's no longer with us, and she was a victim of the stigma that exists out there and the way people treated her, the discrimination, the ignorance. It was just basically an accumulation of things, which she shouldn't have experienced. She became totally isolated. May Allah be pleased with her. May Allah grant her highest status in Jannah, and I hope you will all remember her. And this is why I do what I do. So, Irfhan, what's stigma? What is this word? We hear it.
Well, I first of all, I'm no mental health expert, but stigma is, I think it's the barrier that doesn't allow us to communicate or express ourselves for fear of judgment within our own group, our own community, whatever that might be. Stigma, it has, for me, a negative connotation, so it's something which is bad. It's saying that, because you are feeling this way, or you are doing this, or you're behaving in this way, you should be judged, or I am going to judge you. And that stigma then doesn't allow people to then be open with what they're feeling or what they're going through. We all see it in day-to-day life. As South Asian Muslims, we experience, prejudice, we experience discrimination, and the majority of us have gone through that. And that in itself is a form of stigma, because it's painting you with a brush which perhaps does not apply to you or does not need to be applied to you. And it's how we get over that, because I think now I'm born in this country. My parents are East African, and a lot of people can identify with that. They've either come from East Africa, they've come from India, or whatever it might be. Their parents, grandparents lived here. They established a way of living. They established a culture. But then when you're born here, you are then having to deal with two types of culture. So effectively, there's two identities to you. So one identity is when you're going out to school, you're going out to work, you're trying to not fit in or blend in, but you're trying to interact with the environment around you. And then when you come home, you are then having to behave in a certain way that is culturally relevant or culturally appropriate, or what you're told is culturally relevant, or what you're told is culturally appropriate. So sometimes that can be quite difficult. And for me, I think as you get older, I look back and I think sometimes, it was... I just think, did it have to be like that? What was the rationale for that behavior? What was the rationale for those cultural norms, inverted commas? Did it have to be like that? And now, with as a father myself, 2 teenage children,
Mashallah,
what can I do? Or am I just repeating that cycle that I went through? I'm not saying that was good or bad, but I'm just saying that I need to understand the impact of what I'm doing, how I'm behaving, what my children are seeing, because I don't know. They might not tell me that, oh, Dad, I'm feeling this way, or Dad, this is affecting me. And I just find I get more and more frustrated with our community, because we are so quick to judge. We are so quick to stigmatize. And we seem to think that, right, I'm going to point the finger at you because I'm better than you. And that's thinking, hold on a minute. And again, I'm being very generalist, so it doesn't apply to everyone. But
go for it.
I think collectively, we can be a whole lot better. I really believe that. Yeah. And, you know, I would love to hear from anyone out there listening, thinking, okay, you know, have I got this right? Have I got this wrong? Because I'm only talking from my experience. And I'm not saying my family or my culture or everything is bad. I'm just thinking, hold on a minute. What we're doing here, is it good? Is it valid? Because I'm hearing stories from my peers about how, you know, their family members are struggling with mental health, and they were completely oblivious to the fact that their son, daughter, whoever it was, had this issue. And you just talked about Jamila there.
Yeah.
The people close to Jamila at the time, were they really aware of what she was going through? If not, why not? And what stopped Jamila from talking about it? To seek help, to seek guidance, whatever it was.
And I think that's why we're trying to do what we're trying to do. So by normalizing mental health conversations like we're just having right now, and the difficult stuff, the stuff that normally gets pushed under the rug, we talk about it. But also that the more people talk about their mental health, the more normal it becomes, and it becomes accepted in society. And this is our vision within Jimila's legacy as well. So going back to what you said, because you raised some really, really good points about stigma. Okay, so here we're talking about any type of stigma. So anything where you don't fit the norm, you are seen as different, strange, or anything where, log kya kahenge, that kind of situation, it's really difficult. But Irfhan, you know, you're second gen, aren't you? Right? Am I right? Second generation here? So, yeah. And then obviously your children, third generation. So this cycle that we're talking about, although things are improving, what happens? So the kind of young people that I meet will often be able to be themselves and talk about their mental health in their spaces, whether that be with friends, whether that be at university or school, even to their teachers, lecturers, you know, whatever support they're out there. But then when they come home, they almost have to lock all of that part away and behave a certain way. And that in itself, that secrecy, the shame, that exacerbates the situation. You know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it starts from a very young age. So when we talk about, you mentioned first generation. So people who came to the UK from their home countries, whether it was Africa or India, they tried to, now for me, growing up, so a lot of people my age probably will identify. So I had to grow up where my grandparents or my grandmother didn't speak English. So I had to communicate in my mother tongue, which is Kutchi, to her. So that meant I had to be, you know, fluent in both languages, English and with Kutchi and whatever it was.
MashaAllah.
And you know, those people who've come from Africa are fluent in so many languages. Incredible skill set that they have. And then I think sometimes what happens is that it's I think within our men, they are so constrained, they are so restricted and squeezed in talking about how they feel or being encouraged to. And these are things that you see growing up in a family, you know, from the patriarchs or the males within the family. And it's not necessarily their fault, but I just think we're not going to break that behavior unless we think, okay, right, what works, what doesn't work, and let's try and eliminate what doesn't work, and let's try and build what does work.
Absolutely. And I think if we take what you've just said about men, you know, I'll give you some statistics just to kind of maybe put into context. So 1 in 4 of us in England every year will develop a mental health problem. 1 in 4. And that, you know, I constantly say this is 1 in 4 that services know about, somebody who has accessed a service. Okay, so we know there are more than 1 in 4 of us every year that develops a mental health problem. Okay, and on top of that, the data shows up to 75% of people who develop a mental health problem do not access a service, do not reach out for help. So this is where stigma links in. Very much.
Fear of shame, or being shamed, or, oh my God, what if so-and-so hears that I'm going to this service, or they see me accessing it. And then it's, I don't understand why we have this need to portray that we are a perfect person or a perfect family in the eyes of others, because no one is.
But if you think, I mean, it might be easier for you and I, but if we're so attached to our community, and there's nothing wrong with that, we live in tight-knit communities, everybody knows your business, your neighbor knows what you're doing. We are brought up from a very young age that actions have consequences, which there's nothing wrong with that, right? but also that our actions have consequences not only on our family, on our community. That pressure from a young age can be a hindrance rather than help.
Definitely.
Yeah, for people who are going through things and are unable to share and be themselves. So we're talking about mental health stigma here. So I'm going to go back to that definition. So the Cambridge Dictionary definition is a strong feeling of disapproval that most people in a society have about something, especially when this is unfair. So this is what we mean about mental health, mental illness. Yeah. So I'm not talking about mental health because we all have mental health, just as we all have physical health. I'm talking about when we're not so well, when our mental health is impacted. And that is every single one of you will have a time in your life when it is impacted, because we all lose a loved one. We all go through stressful situations. We may lose a job. We may have financial difficulties. We may fall out with a friend. We may go through a divorce. It could be all sorts of things. These things impact on our mental health. It may be an illness. Irfhan, for example, the South Asian community, yeah, we're high risk of type 2 diabetes. And you know the rates of depression? 50% more likely to develop depression if you have diabetes, right? So we really need to be addressing this stuff. You know, it's big stuff. It's not little stuff. Going back to your point about men, 1 in 8 men every year will develop a mental health problem, commonly depression, anxiety, or OCD, which is obsessive compulsive disorder. So when we're talking about that, why do you think it's 1 in 8 when I said 1 in 4 generally, and 1 in 5 women develop a mental health problem every year, which is depression, anxiety, or self-harm, and children is 1 in 6. So why do you think it's 1 in 8 in men, Irfhan? I'm just making you guess, because you made some points.
Well, I think it's because there's a fear of shame for actually admitting that, hold on, something's not quite right here. I need to look at this. They don't have any outlets to communicate. So, for example, you know, if you're seen as a man who's emotional or expressing themselves, oh, you need to man up, or you need to do this, I think also culturally we don't see examples of where it's okay to talk about how you're feeling, or it's okay to say, actually, I need some help, or actually, I don't understand this. And I think, you know, and I'm particularly aware, for example, my son is going to be 16 tomorrow. And I'm thinking,
Mashallah, happy birthday.
Thank you. and I'm thinking, right, what can I do to encourage him, but make sure it's encouragement where it doesn't border on pressure? Because I know my son, and he's not going to say to me, Dad, you're pressuring me or whatever. He's going to go along because he knows, okay, I want to make, you know, mum and dad happy, whatever it is. But at what point do you recognize, all right, this is encouragement and this is pressure? And I think that's the thing with men is there's so much expectation placed upon us.
Yes.
To be patriarchs, to be leaders, or I think to be providers of our own space and our own family, that sometimes it's that fear of failure. And if you're thinking, oh my God, if I don't do this, I'm failing, I'm letting down my wife, my children, my family, people are then going to think, oh, look at this guy, he's not doing anything, or whatever it is. Yeah. And it then spirals and builds and snowballs into something which can then cause breakdowns, or like you said, you know, some of those conditions which can I'm sure, you know, lead to some very dark places.
Absolutely. And I think that's what you've just, you know, said is really, really vital, because what the starting point is that you are concerned and you're mindful of your actions and how you parent, and that you don't make things worse. So that's the best starting point, Irfhan. You can't go wrong with that, you know?
You know what, for me as a parent, that's my biggest thing, is that how do I balance being someone who can guide them, or just someone who's either just... And I think one of the other things in our Asian culture which really, really winds me up is that, why are we so aggressive all the time?
I agree.
We can never say anything with calmness. Like, oh, what are you doing?
And back goes up.
Or, if you do this, I'll do that to you. And it's just...
And I think, you know, obviously we're stereotyping. Not all parents are like that, and we're not all as a community like that. But that aggression, where does that come from? You know, and sometimes it's because we haven't developed those skills, those social skills, the emotional skills that we need to develop in our boys and our girls. And the role modeling comes in there. So if your father is sensitive, then that pressure on the boy to be all tough and man and kind of thing isn't there as much, and they're able to be, kinder and gentler. And if we look at the sunnah of our beloved Prophet, peace be upon him, he was so compassionate, he was so merciful, he's our example, and that is the character we have to adopt and we have to strive to adopt. So that totally goes against all these things that we're talking about.
And that's you make a really good point, because I really struggled growing up sometimes, because when you'd go to the madrasa, you'd hear about the Prophet ﷺ being so kind, compassionate and loving and all this. But at the same time, you're getting sort of whacked because you didn't know your sabak. You're thinking, what's going on here?
Exactly. And I think the answer lies in the sunnah for everything, Irfan. I think it's so simple, but we make it very complicated. And I always try to think, okay, what would the Prophet, peace be upon him, do in this situation? What is the situation? So if somebody says to me, I'm feeling suicidal, am I going to shout at them and say, oh, it's haram, don't do that? What would the Prophet, peace be upon him, do in this situation? So the answer lies, it's there. We just need to adopt it.
But I also think the fact that because we are Muslim, we seem to think that that's enough. Oh, because we're Muslim, we are immune from mental health, or we're immune from depression and things. And I just think, living in modern day society, we've just come out of a global pandemic, right? We're being bombarded by social media messages left, right and center. And this is, I think, one of the things for the youngsters and parents of youngsters is, they can't escape all this information being thrown at them. They're being told on Instagram, you need to look a certain way, you need to behave a certain way, you need to be earning this much, or you need to be wearing these labels or these things to make you fit in it. And unless you're not doing that, then you're way behind what you want to know. And that's part of how do we manage all of these messages to make sure that we can filter out what is the positive message and what isn't.
Yeah. Because the actions of one person can make somebody turn away, go the other way. We can negatively impact on a person. So I think you're absolutely right. So the impact of stigma, okay, let's talk a little bit about that. So I've got a list of a few things. Because we are talking about our community, okay, so we have our faith, our beautiful faith. We are Muslims. The pressure on us, how society sees us, and we think about 9/11, 7/7, all of those things, and what has, as a result of that, what has happened, the domino effect for our young people growing up now in this society. And you've talked about technology, etc. So we've got the Muslim hat to wear, or the label, and then being of an ethnic minority. So more likely to experience racism, discrimination, inequality. And if you don't have the education opportunities that others do, you come from a low income background, that all of these things exacerbates the situation even more. Now, if you're somebody who has been on the receiving end of Islamophobia, you've experienced hate crime, you're going to want to stay close to your community. You're going to feel a little bit frightened, So you don't want to lose that support from your community by saying, hey, guess what? I've just got diagnosed with schizophrenia, or, I'm struggling and I need to tell somebody, or I don't want people to know I'm accessing a mental health service, So you can see how hard it would be for somebody. I'm trying to see it the other way. So the barrier's there. So if we remove the barriers in our community that we are creating, and we be the friend and not the foe, we can help these people. Because sadly, not only do people's mental health problems deteriorate as a result of them not getting help, they can also then have further deterioration where self-harm can come in place, or suicide ideation, ultimately loss of life. We have a hand to play in that. These things happen in our community.
But do we have enough safe spaces to enable that? Because I think that's the starting point, is where do I go as a starting point, as a safe space? Where can I feel confident, comfortable, and ultimately safe enough to go and say to someone, I need help, or I need to talk about how I'm feeling? Because I've seen, for example, I've seen people who look after an elderly parent. Now, that elderly parent might have a condition like dementia or Alzheimer's.
Yeah, which is extremely difficult.
Which is, I having seen that, you think looking after an elderly person with that condition is harder than looking after a newborn child. the needs of a newborn child and the needs of someone with dementia, Alzheimer's, whatever it might be, are almost the same, because that person is become child. And then what is the impact on the mental health of the carer of that person?
Yeah.
And we don't see that because, again, it comes back down to stigma. Right, as a child, it is your duty to look after. And of course it is. I'm not saying it's not. But 9 times out of 10, we do not have the skills, or we are not equipped with the capability to provide effective care. And because we don't have that, that stops us from asking for help. So asking for help from, the National Health Service, social services, whatever it might be. Because you think, oh, you know what? If I get a carer for my mum or dad 3-4 times a week, people are going to think, oh, look at him. Exactly. He's shirking his responsibility. He's lazy, this, that.
Yeah.
It's this vicious cycle.
And it's again and again. And what, again, carers mental health, all carers, is really important because it's a very stressful job. And for most people, it's 24-hour or it's constant. And for some, it's lifelong. And that pressure is massive. And when we live in the community, for example, if I talk about my work in the past with learning disabilities, those parents and carers I was working with were saying we can't even take our son to a wedding or daughter to a family gathering, a Eid celebration, because they all stare, they all look. Yeah. So the isolation that happens as a result of stigma is massive, and the mental health impact of that is huge. So their safe spaces are really important. Carers having time out is important. Starting with education, I think, is really important in our communities. We need education. So here I'm talking about mental health education, psychoeducation, but you're right, education about all sorts of things, caring, dementia. We're not equipped in that as well, but we're also not equipped to be carers. And totally get. So sometimes we may have our ideas of how somebody should sit or sleep, and actually we could be causing more harm to somebody. They may get bed sores because we've just kept them in bed all the time, and that's because we don't have the knowledge.
I can speak from personal experience. So when my mother she passed away 10 years ago, and we were caring for her.
May Allah grant high status in Jannah, Ameen.
But what still lives with me today is the fact that we were feeding her, trying to force feed her, because you think you need to eat, you need to keep your strength, not realizing that the food was going into her lungs, and that which caused an infection which ultimately she didn't recover from. So that is something which you think, why did I do that? If only I hadn't done that. And you think, but there were services that we were trying to access, and this is not a comment on how good or bad a service is. But what I'm saying is that we, and also trying to move somebody around. So if somebody has lost their mobility or they can't move, that manual handling element of the person is really important, because you don't realize you're doing more harm than good.
That's right.
And you just think, oh no, home is the best place for her or him, and we're just going to keep her here, and what do these people know, and this. But actually, if you really care about someone, you need to make sure you understand that, are you fully equipped to do what you need to do?
Absolutely, totally agree. So that education is really important. So some of the things, Irfhan, the impact of stigma is people become isolated. As a result, then become lonely. They end up having low self-esteem because they don't feel good about themselves, because they think, well, I don't fit in society, I'm not good enough, I'm not accepted. Yeah. So the problem must lie within me. That lack of self-worth, feeling of disappointing others, feeling inadequate, and then those mental health problems increasing, and then people reaching crisis.
Yeah, so that feeling of, what's the point? Why am I doing this? Or people, will be better off if I'm not around, this, that, and the other. So I just feel like, wow, we obviously we can't solve the problems in 1 hour show, but I think what you're doing is really much needed. And I would really urge all our male listeners today that if you are feeling, even if it's you're just feeling down, that can be a sign of depression, or you could be heading down a dark place. And it's really, really important. And I know as well, again, from, the death of my mother, it impacted my father so much that he then, he suffered a heart attack because of that loneliness and that isolation. And I look at him, I think, did he feel comfortable to talk about how he was feeling, that sense of loss, that missing your companion, your life partner? And I'm sorry, Dad, if you're listening, but
Bless him.
that was.
And I think this is it. We don't talk. I mean, it's the same with grief. We don't talk about grief. When it happens, okay, that's it.
We're not encouraged to, because you held that COVID memorial event a few months back, and I remember one of the contributors there said, when someone's crying, I don't tell them to stop. I can't remember who it was, the gentleman from Loros, and that was such a powerful thing to say. You're thinking, actually, he's right, because normally the reaction is, oh, don't cry, stop. You shouldn't do this. But actually, that crying is an outlet, and
it
once
is a release.
they get it out of them, they will feel much better. And
Absolutely.
then when you restrict that, or you try and curtail it, it's not good. So
and it is the suppressing of feelings, and what happens with suppressing of feelings, you constantly keep on suppressing. Eventually, it will explode. So we need safe spaces, as you say, and I mean we're creating those within the work I do as well. We do have those spaces. Please do go on Jamila's Legacy website, have a look on social media. But there are lots of other organisations that are doing things as well. If you're looking for culturally appropriate services, there are culturally appropriate services out there. If you're looking for generic, not everybody wants to actually go to a service that they is part of their community because they don't want to be identified. So use whatever works for you. We'll put some links up for you so you can go and have a look. Mind is one of the organisations that come to mind. Now, I wanted to actually bring up a report that Mind did in 2021.
Yeah.
So Mind Leeds and Bradford. So they did some research around ethnic minorities and mental health stigma. Okay. And I'm just going to read a quote out from there. So it was a report on mental health support for South Asian communities. And what it said was stigma, shame, guilt, and embarrassment were the common themes in both men and women. Family pressures and lack of accessible information were also listed as barriers. So if we put that together, that's basically what we've been saying. And this is 2021. Yeah. So this is current. This is right now. So we're not talking about, when our parents came here or in our time. We're talking now. We still have this, and you mentioned something about faith and that people denying that we as Muslims can have mental health problems. So what's that about, Irfhan?
I just think sometimes, and I think because we're Muslim, and the fact that suicide in Islam is not a good thing, and it's considered that. Though that person who takes their own life is condemned to hell and this and that, and Allah knows best.
That's right, Allah knows best.
And of course, giving of life and taking of life is the exclusive decision of Allah Subhanahu wa Taala. It's all in His hands. But I just think sometimes, because we live in such a diverse environment and such a complex environment, we as people, we're wonderful human beings. We're all unique. We're all different, and we all react to certain things in different ways. And again, going back to being mindful, I sometimes think that. So, for example, growing up, going to the madrasa, going to the masjid, you're always told, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, don't do this, or you're going to be condemned to this. I would like to see people telling us what we should do rather than what we shouldn't do.
I totally agree. Tell me what to do then, please. Yeah.
And or if you don't know something, then you're useless, or if your lack of knowledge is this. And this is something which I think again stops people, because that you want to then take sort of refuge. You withdraw. You actively withdraw from your environment, from the society, and from the community, because you just think, I'm tired of being told what not to do. You feel you don't belong. And I think that the thing is, I often hear people tell me that, I get told that I'm not praying enough, or you're weak in faith, or total denial that this is anything to do with mental health, and this is just a physical health problem, because obviously mental ill health can manifest in physical symptoms as well. Or people will say things like, somebody's done nazar on you, or black magic, or jinn possession, and somebody has actually got a proper mental health diagnosis. And they need help, because there are some mental health disorders you need medication for. Without medication, you can't function. Let's take bipolar disorder. That can put you at high risk if you come off your medication, right? So
don't have the education. We make these judgments.
But I reckon there's probably so many undiagnosed bipolar conditions out there in the community because we don't talk about it. We don't understand, we don't access help.
Yeah, and this is the problem. I've got Imran Akram coming on our show week 3, and he has lived experience of bipolar disorder, and he's going to talk about his organisation and his personal experiences. So I'm looking forward to that as well. But I think what the challenges are for all of us is, 1, we don't have the knowledge. 2, we need to have these spaces, as you say. And 3, we need to stop judging. We need to stop doing this judging. You know, I keep saying this, don't be part of the problem, be part of the solution. And I know you mentioned suicide, and I'm going to mention 2 things. I'm not a scholar, but if you studied mental illness and you saw how ill some people are, they are not often in a state of making those decisions. And also the fact that not everyone who takes their life intended to take their life. We don't know. We don't know in those moments what is going on for those individuals. And by the way, Jamila did not take her own life. Just to make it clear, I didn't want anybody thinking that's what I was alluding to. She just had severe mental health problems and died very young at the age of 35. And if she'd have had the support from the community and from the services, she would have been still around. But obviously, at the end of the day, life and death is in Allah's hands. And secondly, to say that we as a community really, really need to work hard on this, because you know what? Since the pandemic, we lost a lot of people in our community. And I'm one of those people who lost not only my dad, but a lot of relatives as well. There's a lot of people out there who are struggling, and we need to be supporting each other, be kind to each other. You don't have to know it all, but don't judge people, don't push them away, and don't be so cruel with your name calling. And, you know, it's just so the opposite of the sunnah. I can't understand when people laugh in gatherings and make fun of people.
I think that's the thing. So going back to what you said at the beginning of the program, that everything is in the sunnah, and is, you know, there is guidance, there is everything. So there's nothing to take away from that. But it's like you said, it is people's behaviors. And I also find sometimes, and, you know, this might be a bit of a controversial thing to say, but I'm going to say it anyway. I think sometimes our communities, there's sort of like inter-prejudice going on within the community.
Yes.
And we're so insular that, you know, because, we don't do this, we don't know, but it affects us. Whether we like it or not, we are affected, we are impacted by everything that goes on. And I just think sometimes if we are a bit more open and, you know, allow people to access us, but also we need to access everything else around. Because I'm a great believer that unless you understand others, you can't understand yourself.
Oh my goodness, what a good point. What a good point.
In order to understand yourself better, you need to have experience of others.
Absolutely.
And I always say that to my children, you know, have friends from different backgrounds.
Yes.
Have friends from because you won't understand as you get older going into the world and whatever, you know, God has planned for you. You need to be the best version of yourself all the time.
Absolutely. And I think we can't work in silos and isolation. It's more about insulation and not putting fear in our children that, oh my God, if you step out of line or if you don't stay within your community, you're going to lose your faith. Because how is that building strong iman in our children? I don't agree with that. What we need to do is we need to give them the tools and the resources and have trust in them.
But also going back to what you said about as Muslims and the prejudice and things, let's take control of the narrative.
Oh yes.
You know, let us dictate and allow, you know, what is said about us in the right way. Let us take control rather than being reactive and just sitting there or just criticizing from our armchairs, whatever it might be. Let us take control of the narrative so we can actually be examples and leaders within the community rather than what we just talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm just going to quote that report, something that was said by one of the authors. For the women, there were myths around, if I disclose I'm suffering with my mental health, I'm going to be classed as an unfit mother or an unfit wife or daughter-in-law. With men, it was similar. They were saying, if I disclose I'm suffering with ill mental health, then my standing in the community, my credibility as the breadwinner, as the person in control, as a protector of other people, is going to come into disrepute. And that kind of summarizes, I know what you were saying, I was saying. But for me, I think I hear this day in, day out. The people that come and share with me, please don't tell anyone. Or, you know, they will choose to come to certain things but won't come to others because, oh no, so-and-so might be there, so-and-so might see me. Because the absolute shame, whether that's the shame that they themselves may have a mental health problem or their family member, and the pressure of hiding and being secret about everything, the anxiety that creates on top of everything else they're already going through is immense.
The thing that you said about daughter-in-laws and that expectation placed upon new daughters that come into a family, I think part of the problem is we are very selective about what aspects of Islam we choose to apply.
Oh, and you know, look, a lot of what we talked about is culture.
Yeah.
Most of what we've talked about is culture. We're not having a knock on our beautiful faith.
And we have to separate
culture
from the religion because, again, depending on what community you originate from, whether it's Pakistani, Indian, African, there are different elements of that culture which people think is actually part of religion.
Yeah, and norms and you know, nuances, and then they expect the newcomer to know them all as well. And then the moment you do something wrong, you know, you're kind of judged and punished.
But that's the thing, though, because it doesn't matter how much you do, it's never enough.
It's never enough. And this is why we need to change. We literally need to change. You know, I hear comments like, you know, from people who would tell me that, oh, you know, I've been told by my sister-in-law that I went through it. It's your turn now. Put up with it and shut up.
It's almost like a rite of passage type thing, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes. It's you know, I still get shocked when I hear this, because even today we have these same issues. It doesn't matter how educated, you know, our daughters, daughter-in-laws, our sons are, or what they know, what they don't know. We don't have the basic human skills. And this is where it's going wrong, where whether it's spouses treating each other in a horrendous way, or whether it's in-laws, whether it's parenting, whatever we're doing, we just don't have those basic skills. We have theory, we have knowledge, we don't have practice.
But I just think also when someone does fall down, we have this desire to just punish them.
And they enjoy it.
We want to punish them rather than, hey, you know, it's okay, let's work on it together. No, why did you do this? Oh, that's it, you know, and there's such an overreaction. I mean, we're melodramatic at the best of times. I mean,
again, apologies, we are generalizing. We don't mean everyone.
But you know what I mean, and I do say it sort of tongue in cheek. But let's just, you know, tone it down a little bit. Yeah,
no, I agree. So I think the starting point is kindness and compassion with everyone,
which is what the Prophet sallallahu it was what he was known for.
Yeah, and we do not know anyone's story. We do not know what is going on in somebody's life. So when people act out, behave a certain way, you know, for example, when somebody's going through a period of poor mental health, they may stop contacting their friends. They may stop answering the phone. They may not call you. They may not text you anymore. And we take it very personal. And we start saying, oh, after everything I did for that person.
How could he do that? Or how could she do that?
Yeah. And we forget that it's not about you. It was never about you. This person is going through an extremely difficult time. And so be mindful of that. It's not always somebody's being cruel or mean with intent. And the other thing that we do is that we have this expectation of people that no matter what, oh, you know, they should be tough. What's wrong with you? I went through much worse than you. And we have this in generations as well, where, you know, families who've experienced extreme poverty or gone through things, and then they're telling their children or grandchildren, well, you've got it so cushy. What's your problem? Or we judge a woman, oh, she's got a beautiful house in Oadby. What's her problem? What's she got to moan about? And we don't understand mental illness is a illness. Just because we can't see it, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It's an illness, and it can happen for all sorts of reasons, even chemical reasons.
Absolutely. Totally agree with everything you said. I hope I've spoken from everything I've said comes from my experience. So please, don't judge me. Don't judge me on what I've said. I hope you found it enlightening, and I hope it's resonated to a certain extent with what I've said. But again, thank you so much for asking me to be a guest on your show.
Jazakallah so much, Irfan. Really, really appreciate it. And I just want to say, mental health stigma can be addressed if we continue to normalize having mental health conversations. So take care, and if you are struggling, please reach out and get help.